morning, everyone. After a very long, lengthy introduction made by the Director, Judicial Academy, I think with many of you who are sitting in front of me already know me as a judge who have worked here with my humble experience. Okay. And some of you were the persons whom I had addressed as the first batch of the judicial officers in the Judicial Academy in my old chamber, as the Advocate General, which we took forcibly from the government. And then one is Ranjita, the other, I don't see anyone else here. Yes, Joanna is there. And I think Devika is missing.
No, Season.
What Judicial Academy is, how it started, there are a lot of teething problems. In fact, I must give, due credit to Honorable Justice Pius Kuriakose, who joined us for a brief period. But during that period, he was very instrumental in giving that push to start the academy. He said, brother, why not start in one place somewhere, in one room will do. I said, okay, then we have this Advocate General's office, which I was holding, and that by the time we had shifted, the Advocate General's office shifted to where it is now. So that's what happened. Then once it got shifted, then we got the government involved, then invited to that time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Supreme Court judges was here. I can't remember now, recall. And this is Pramod Kohli, former Chief Justice, who was also very, very keen in starting the academy. And I must tell you that we gave birth to the concept of the Judicial Academy in 2011, 2010, I think, yes, when Justice Barin was here for a short period. He's no more, God rest his soul in peace. He was a very, forward-looking Chief Justice. The moment I mentioned this, he kept it in his mind. Then in one of the criminal matters, we heard the argument. It was, I think, that Celeb Tank murder case, So in that, he noticed a lot of flaws in the judgment, the manner in which the case had proceeded. So that after the case was over, he dictated the judgment, heard the matter, dictated judgment, and we came out. Then he said, brother, what you are saying is right. We must start a Judicial Academy. So that's how things started moving. And ultimately, the rest is on history, and we are all sitting here today. Okay, and I tell you one thing, they designed everything. The complete layout plan of the Judicial Academy was done on the basis of what we had seen in Chandigarh. So, and what happened very luckily for us was, Justice Pramod Kohli was the judge in charge of the Judicial Academy when he was in Chandigarh High Court. So the moment I suggested, let's have it in Chandigarh style, design, he completely argued and sort of agreed. And then we called the engineers from the PW department, and the architects, and we had a sitting, 2-3 sittings we had. Then architect told them that please send your engineer and your architect to Chandigarh. So they went to Chandigarh, and then the design was made, of course, in a little smaller scale, because there's a huge one. It's huge, it's like 5-star hotel, If you ever happen to go there, you really like it. So we as judges used to be accommodated there, when during our visits and all that, we used to go to LTC and all. So we used to be kept there. So that is how it happened. And today I'm very happy when I see that the academy is rendering a service as required, as envisaged. We were thinking that why should we always send our judicial officers outside? You see, the system over there is not exactly as what we have here. Of course, it's similar, but then if we have the training center here, then our officers would be, getting the training in the local flavor, So that what happened to them, they would directly, connecting themselves, relating themselves to whatever was happening. So that was one of the concepts, and of course in areas where there are very intricate kind of training required, we may send them to some say, expert institutions, for that purpose. For example, this legislation drafting, of course, you are not connected with that. The legislation drafting is something, which is a very specialized kind of a sort of profession, which is to be, it can be done. We know we can do it. Like for example, I have drafted. I mean, as Advocate General, I had to dictate so many laws, notifications issued under the executive powers of the state under Article 162, because executive power is coextensive with the legislature. So, in the absence of any law in place, the executive orders covering that area would be as enforceable as any of the statutes passed by the legislature assembly. So, in that sense, there are many gaps, which had to be filled up by issues of notifications, orders, gazette notifications, of course, duly gazetted later on, of course, under the executive powers. So, likewise, I was very fortunate in the sense that when I joined the profession, Mr. N.G. Sharpa missed out one part. Before I became the DDM, joined as the DDM South in '82, I had joined my seniors chamber in December 1980. Because I passed on Calcutta University, the evil of Calcutta University was, first they delayed the examination, all the time hartal, going on. I think those people who have come from Bengal, my counterparts are not there. But if you see my time, because that was time when Congress government had been toppled and it was being, gradually being overwhelmed by the left front. Of course, I'm not talking politics, I'm just saying, making a statement of fact. So there is a lot of clashes. University was like that only. So, what was that? Yes. Then we had some sort of, what was that? I'm sorry, I forgot the context. Oh yes. So then I passed from there. Then the examination, yes, I was on that. That got delayed. Examination got delayed. Results got delayed. So I was left in the lurch, So then that time I joined my seniors chamber in Gangtok. That, of course, I was in Calcutta for some time with some seniors, just strategy and all that. So then I joined here. Then at that time we were in the transitional phase. Sikkim was in the transitional phase from the previous system of government to the present system of government, and there are a lot of gaps insofar as the notifications are concerned. As you know, we were governed by the 1898, the CRPC, and that also, not all of them, certain chapters are not enforced. So, in order to cover, and those were catered by certain notifications which issued earlier during the days of the Chogyal, during the thing, but it was done by the bureaucrats, all right. So, these were not sufficient. So, in order to fulfill those requirements, then we issued a lot of gazette notifications under the executive powers, because pending legislation, because we didn't have central legislation here. So in place of central legislation, all these notifications covered up that particular gap. So then what happened? Subsequently, I don't know, CRPC, even after that, we continued to be governed by the old CRPC. Even the CPC, 1908 was in force. 73, amended CPC was not in force. So then first of all, there was a criminal reference number 1. I don't exactly remember, 1985 I think, when Justice Bhargava was here and Justice Dayan was sitting in the division bench. The matter was referred by Mr. G.P. Roy, who was district judge, and there's a reference provision on the CRPC, I can't exactly remember the provision. Under that it was said. So while arguing that, it was then the judgment was pronounced saying that it will be the old that particular lacuna or whatever doubts that exists would be overcome if the new CRPC is brought in. Now that is all it was said. Okay, it is not there was no sort of conclusive finding. Now the conclusive finding came when there was a revision, criminal revision from the from the special court, this under the Prevention of Corruption Act. Justice Subha was that, he was district judge, so he was a special court for that. So in that, what happened? Mr. Bhandari had challenged the charge before, the court, saying that the charge hasn't wrongly framed. It has to be framed under the Criminal Amendment Law of 1953, and therefore, this having been framed under the new Act, CRPC and this IPC, I'm sorry, PC Act, that it was 88, I think. So this is therefore there was no case stands. So ultimately then what happened? Then it came to High Court. In the High Court, I argued on behalf of the state. That time I was the Advocate General. That time I was the public prosecutor. So I argued the matter. Then I said, okay, this it would be that by implication that gets repealed by enforcement of the new CRPC, because there is no saving clause anywhere. Where says that Sikkim law, there's 1898 and this old PC Act or the Amendment Law of 1953 would continue to be enforced. Okay, then anyway, so this was ultimately heard, and then it was decided that the new CRPC and the new the PC Act would come into force from the 1st of September of that year, 1995. Okay, so that's how then things got smoothened out and the laws started coming in place. Even the CRPC, same thing happened. Similar kind of thing happened. I'm not dealing much on this. So a lot of history behind this, is not that this the present system of the judicial the law that is prevalent in Sikkim, didn't happen overnight. It happened over a period of time, naturally so, because we are not governed by so many other laws, and we are governed by the special provision under the Constitution, as you know, under Clause K of Article 37(1)(f). The laws in force before the appointed day are deemed to be enforced until amended or repealed by the competent authority or legislature. That's what he says. So there was no repeal, but there were some laws we said by implication it's time repeal, because in view of the fact that the same field, you can't cover the same field, and the fact that we are already exercising the privileges or whatever powers that we have in those laws would indicate that we have already by our conduct waived that particular thing. So that's how things moved on. So anyway, I was on that. So then 80 I joined, and that I was very lucky, because it was a transitional phase. I had a great opportunity to learn a lot of things, and that is the time I learned about what is the legislation drafting. So that way, the government was very wise. They had got one joint secretary level officer from the law ministry, from the legislation department. See, they are in law ministry, the legislation department. Now the legislation department, one joint secretary officer called Mr. P. Jetwani. He was a highly trained officer in legislation drafting. So with his assistance and with the experience of Justice Dev was there, and of course then we had Mr. G.P. Chaudhary, who was senior advocate and the Advocate General. So these laws are framed. Okay, but so many, as I was saying, there's so many notification things that came up. So that continued, and then in between, I do not know much, because I was not so much connected with the work. But ultimately, then I joined when I became first the Additional Advocate General. Additional Advocate General was only a terminology, by the way. I must inform you all. I'm not saying that I'm blowing my trumpet, okay. It actually means I was Advocate General appointed under Article 165. Article 165 is only Advocate General. Now there is a history behind it. I will not delay on that. Okay, but actually I was the Advocate General from 1987. Sorry, 97. Then I continued. Okay. So that is during that my tenure, we had to also make some laws. One of the laws was, like for example, SADA. Now I must give you a history behind SADA. Once, it so happened that we were very concerned about this, misuse of the substance or abuse of substance by young people going astray, and many of them, losing their lives. So then there was a meeting at a very high level where the chief minister was there, health minister, and then I was requested to come. I had gone attended the meeting, and they had said how to get over it. So then I had suggested, why not make a law? I'm quite confident that we have the legislative competence to pass such a law, because NDPS is regarding narcotic psychotropic substance, okay? But one of the prescription drugs, for example, they were very misusing things like codeine. I mean, the Scorex and, so many fancy devil, all those kind of things. It contains codeine, So, but the codeine was not the thick substance they were misusing, abusing. It was the product of codeine. So then these things we can bring in, because it doesn't cover by the Central Act. That's my view. But then, if you give me some time, I'll try to confirm this. So I was very lucky at that very time, just about within a month or so, former Chief Justice, Justice J.S. Verma, visited Sikkim. Okay, he happened to be a good friend of mine, a family friend of mine. So we had sitting over tea. That time I just asked him. That was the bar president also, by the way. Okay. So then I asked him over whether can we do it or not. Then he said, why not? It can be done. Then he gave me all the hints what is to be done. So then immediately I went back the next day, sent a note. Then process began. Of course, there were some flaws. I mean, anything new, you cannot expect everything to be in perfection. But at least something started. That time Mr. Purkaz was there in the law department, law secretary. He, of course, in his own inimitable style, okay, made the law. And then there were some flaws. Later on we discovered we have covered it up with a lot of amendments and all that. Still it needs amendment, but still at least we had some law which worked as a deterrent. So that's how things happen. Now the other one was, now again as we, all this will come when I'm discussing all this, because it will come while I give you a talk. Because legislation drafting, there is nothing like, it's not a subject where there are a lot of judgments and all that, It's a basic, very simple thing, drafting of law. What do you say? All experienced judges here. What is legislation drafting? Tell me. Mrs. Karma, I think you are senior most here. What do you say? Legislation drafting.
Laws, rules and regulations.
Yeah, the simple thing like that. Okay, there's one. Do others agree? You will agree, it's drafting. So it's basically the legislation drafting, it's drafting legislation. So it's a very simple thing, but there are some things which need to discuss, that is all. So in the legislation drafting, there are, what happens, it's not just the principal act or the principal provision that we enact. There are what we call a delegated legislation, as you know. Now delegated legislation are there as rule-making powers, regulation making powers provided under the statute. Now that they generally what they do is the legislature, suppose you've done the legislature but it's drafted by the poor draftsman, okay? So many laws don't get even discussed nowadays. That's the irony. I'm going to tell you all that. Okay, but whatever the case, in these things they give powers to frame bylaws, powers to frame rules, power to frame regulations. The reason which these powers are given is because it's not possible to imagine all the wherewithals, the problems that one would be facing in the future by the persons who are executing the laws. So as a consequence, that day to day, of course, then they are given the power to frame the rules, frame the regulations, frame the bylaws. Okay. Now, only the what you call that fiat that which is given is, which is not written, but it is understood, is that it should not be in conflict with the prime principal act, and it should not be in excess of the powers that are vested in the act, or it should not be in conflict with any of the constitutional provision or other statutes. So these are the what you call that, the impediments or so-called impediments or the boundaries which are laid down. Otherwise, you have to be free to sort of enact those rules and frame those rules to give effect to the provisions. So, in that, while doing that, Sikkim faced one situation. We had this Right to Information Act that came in 2002, I think, So, now we had to make rules. Now the administrative department, the Home Department, they came running to me with the file, okay? They said, sir, what to do? I was Advocate General then. They said, what to do? I said, you have to make the rules, right? I said, yeah, rules, how to do? Of course I don't know, I'm not, so I was good officers there, very good officers. They said, sir, I said, no, you just prepare something, what you feel is necessary. Okay? So, then of course, I said, what do you think should be there? Act the yes sir. Now, what is that? Act is that you have a right to information. There are certain exceptions which you cannot get it, okay? Now, other than that, what are the things? What is the procedure? No, procedure, I said, you please prepare in your own way. So they brought, of course, it's all in a mess. So then, the present rule under RTI Act was created in my chamber, as in the Advocate General chamber, okay? So that was published. The only thing that which got changed later on, one of the main things that got changed was they reduced the fees for information. I said, okay, they wanted to do something high so that the frivolous applications don't come. I said, okay, but don't make it too high. So made it 100 rupees, per application. That also was found high. That was later on. Of course, later on I was not concerned because I had done my part of the job, handed over, done and dusted, okay. So, but then they did it and they brought it down to 10 rupees or something like that. So that's so whatever the case, so these things happened. So we have a rule in place, right? So going forward with this, the subject today is understanding this general principle legislation. And that's there. You kind of noted it down. So I wanted you to take it down, because see, instead of it's giving oral talk, better give a presentation so that you just jot it down. Because I don't expect the seniors not to know, okay? But then still, it is said when I was a student during my student days in school, we had a Tibetan master, So we have got shloks, that proverbs, One of them says, a wise man will learn even from a dog. So there's nothing that you cannot learn. Everything, there's always a scope for learning. So I said, let me put this so that from there maybe one or two sentences may be useful to you as you move forward, as you have long inning to go forward. Alright. So I have said that legal legislation drafting is an intricate job. It is intricate. Okay. It requires extreme care to ensure the language used in the provision is clear and conveys the will of the legislature. Now, what is the will of the legislature? See, the will of the legislature is expression of the will of the people. People want that law. Alright. So, legislature represents that. And what they want should be clearly spelled out. There should be so far as possible, no ambiguity. Now, legislation, because they have to face a lot of criticism. As you know, we criticize. I was a lawyer, I was a judge. Okay, so are you all. And while writing a judgment, you come up with certain provisions. What is this? You don't understand. When you read the first sentence, by the time you end, you forget what you read, what is there in the beginning. So this happens. Some legislation so long, one paragraph sentence, you have to wait, take your breath. Okay. So that kind of a thing should be avoided, but sometimes unavoidable. Under such circumstances, what happens is there is a thing called explanation. Or explanation, provisos. Because if you cannot, like for example, you make certain rights or obligations, it will give an impression as if everything is covered by it. There is no restriction, or in both of our obligations as well as your restrictions. But the proviso, gives that restriction. How much, provided that, you come across so many provisions. The Evidence Act, the CPC, the CRPC, just filled with it. Okay, provided that, and so many other statutes if you come across it. As you progress in life, you come across so many of them. So things like proviso, then things like explanation, they come into play to clarify areas which may give some confusion, give rise to some confusion, or create some sort of an ambiguity. So in order to get over it, so what they do is they provide for this provision, provisos and explanations and things like that. So the requirement, as far as possible, it has to be very clear, and it has to be so much and simple language. As far as simplicity is the hallmark, so far as the drafting legislation is concerned. Now, another aspect is now, as we discussed, we'll also go through the legislative process. Okay. General principle, what we agree is when the legislation comes out, an act comes. Okay. What we say is that it is passed by the legislature or the legislature, parliament or state assembly. Right. In effect, what happens? It is that draftsman, that poor draftsman behind the desk, who prepares that. Okay. He prepares that. And then, in terms of what is already set by the ministry, he is bound. But expression is given by the draftsman. So, therefore, as a consequence, I am saying there are room for criticism. Okay, the poor fellow's work, he may have spent hours burning the midnight candle, so to say, and then ultimately he has to face a lot of flack later on. So this is what happens. But then that is what is believed. Right? Now, why I say so? Now, because the now present system of deliberations, when a bill is introduced, it is a bill which has gone through certain scrutiny. Like first, there is a policy formulated by the government. What is kind of law that is required? There is a legislative policy. Okay. Now that is conveyed to what you call the advice cell in the ministry, and then the advice cell will look into the feasibility whether that law can be made or not, keeping in mind the constitutional requirement, the list, okay, the permissibility as per the list, the 7th schedule, okay, and then other statutes. Keeping those in mind, the advice committee would then advise the government the feasibility of it. If it is feasible, then it is then sent to the cabinet. When the cabinet clears it, then it's sent to the ministry for drafting. Then it's there, that place that is the draftsman follows the requisite procedure for drafting, and then ultimately placed before the assembly, the assembly or the legislature. Now, the irony is, most of the time, if you have seen it, what's happening nowadays, parliamentary proceedings are all televised. Even, of course, in Sikkim, there's not much of room for deliberations. But I'm talking of these states where they have oppositions and all that. First of all, there's no meaningful discussion whether any provisions are, whether the bills that's introduced is rightly prepared or not, whether it is necessary at all or not. These are not discussed, because even meaningful amendments to the bill, which are given by the opposition, they are not treated with grace. They are just overlooked. They just brush aside. Now, even the treasury bench, that is the ruling bench, they have to keep their mouth shut because there is a whip, party whip, saying you better keep quiet, please support. So what happens as a consequence is, many a time, unwise things happen. Like I had experience of, the fortune of meeting a very senior friend, in the this legislation drafting cell of the ministry. For example, we have this BNS Act, all this BNSSS, and all this, they were done, tearing hurry. So you see that as a consequence, there are a lot of flaws in that. Flaws in that, and it says that this would be later on amended. This would require amendment because the things have not moved as they wanted. Because it was done, everything had been done within a period of 1 month or something. Otherwise, it requires at least 6 months to consider all that. And the whole team has to be involved in it. So just a few officers, they were there, and then they were direct to finish it. So they took place in that next session of the Parliament, and they did it, and they said they are not happy about it. I'm not saying, these are things which I got to know in person. What I'm saying is, when things are rushed, and the House is governed by a brute majority of a particular party, and the opposition views, although maybe very wise, are not given due respect, then what happens sometimes, these kind of flaws do occur. And the same thing, like for example, that we have the famous National Judicial Accountability Appointment Commission, the NJAC judgment. Now, Supreme Court set it aside because the phases will come as we read. The first, I'm talking about the legislation period. The pre-legislation period is where formulation of policy, then a drafting, procedures, advice taken from the various cells, and then after that, the actual process of preparing the bill, clearance with the cabinet, and then before the bill being submitted by the concerned minister. Okay. Now all these things go on, but unfortunately, what happens is that this NJSC Act also was a lot of things appointed during the time of the argument, during the place when the bill was placed, time when the bill was placed. But as you know, the thing got passed as it is. Then, and naturally went to the Supreme Court. Now there are a lot of criticism saying that no, the judges have decided their own case. Now the judges have not decided their own case. They are deciding as legislation whether the legislation is sound or not. So what they wanted for the independent judiciary, whether the judiciary, whether that was preserved or not, whether it's going to interference with the executive or not, or whether going to be sort of dominated by the judiciary or not. All those have to be balanced. So when they found without going to the details, of the finding, they found that it was not as it was envisaged it to be. So they struck it down. And a very detailed judgment, as you know. So though these kind of things happen. So this is the post-litigation session. Legislation session. The first is introduction when you conceive. Then legislative proceeding when the bill is being discussed in the Parliament or in the legislature. Then after that, once the President assents to the bill, then the job of the the legislative assembly or legislatures, be it Parliament or legislative assembly, is over. Right? It is notified, gazetted. Then comes the post-legislative part. They are responsible over, they have done their job. Now then, post-legislative section of the state would be where things may be questioned. And where there are 2-3 aspects. One is that how it affects the public, because the laws are made for the public. Okay, how is it going to affect the institutions, all right, and how it would be sort of viewed by the judiciary if it's challenged. So that is the post-legislative. And so 3 stages are very critical when the legislation process. So we have a healthy system in the sense that there are series of screening process that goes on, ultimately giving shape to the acts that comes finally in the form of gazette notification. So Russia, they have different system. That they are what we call socialist country, and this government is formed like we don't have the system. They don't have the system that we have. So there, the legislators, when they make law, they also have the responsibility to interpret. And I was quite surprised, you know. I mean, I was not aware, when I was reading it, just pause here for a moment. This legislation drafting, these are things which we used to think, you know, take it, whatever that, for granted. Decisions they would follow, just do your job, okay, as a lawyer, as a judge, just listen to the parties, pass your orders, judgments, okay. But when time comes to give a talk like this, you are made to again, you know, brush up whole thing. I have not studied so much. I have studied for this, you know. I didn't want to sort of bore you people, and at least try to give something to you so that you get some sort of useful information. Okay. They call me resource person. I said, please don't call me that, because I'm not. I said I'm resourceless. The only resources that I have some sort of experience long ago as a lawyer and a judge. Okay. So these are the only things that this I can share. So in Russia, that's the beauty of it. You know, the authority which has made the law have the responsibility to interpret it also. So it becomes very convenient. There is no room for disputes. But in our country, like in our not only in country, there are similar systems which they have all over the world. It is left on the judiciary. They have no responsibility. They pass the law, finish. Then earlier there was a time, there's a thing called reference also, there was a thing like that. Those things got over. But the legislators come forward and explain the meaning of that law, what the law really, is meant for. So things would happen. But this is a very rare thing that happens. In India, it never happens. I mean, it's something which they perhaps would not know what law was passed for. So the minister in charge, he just asks, hand it over with the bill. He faces it, reads whatever is written there in the objects and reasons, then he sits down. Right? So he doesn't know. So that's the irony of it. I'm very sad to say this, okay, but this is what is actually happens. So they don't have the responsibility, they don't have the capability to explain. So as a consequence, now they after the bill is passed, they just do and close their hands, clap their hands, go home, have a good time. Now the entire responsibility lies on the judiciary. They have to now interpret it when this question. Okay. So that is the problem with our system. Had it been the responsibility of the legislators, okay, to explain, things would have been convenient for the public. Now, the one more problem arises, Of course, then we have, like this part will see that many of the time, even the judiciary, judges like you are sitting here, I mean, you must be passing sometimes orders to have passed, sometimes legal concepts are placed before you. Then what do you do? When the things are not clear, we have leading cases where the courts have relied upon General Clauses Act. Okay. Now, but General Clauses Act is meant to shorten, make it convenient. Okay. But that General Clauses Act, which just has over 31 sections, if I am not mistaken, has got volumes written. GP Singh's book. Okay, you must be knowing. That's where I have to take down much of the material, and for some other books I have to. See, the GP Singh has concentrated, he's a master in interpretation of statutes and General Clauses Act. So is Justice N.S. Bindra, Like now, then we had our own, the Advocate General for my predecessor, two before me, Mr. Bhepa Sarthi. He was a master, he was an academic, and he had written interpretation of statutes. General Clauses Act is G.P. Singh and M.S. Bindra. And they have written volumes. And of course, the process earned a lot of money in terms of commissions. But what I'm saying is that in a law which is meant to shorten the process of interpretation has given rise to so many. And so is there's so many laws. For example, Lottery Regulation Act 1996. Okay. Now that is meant to shorten litigation. Earlier it was 1988. 48, sorry. That also meant to, it is an alternative sort of forum for redressal of disputes so far as the commercial disputes are concerned. That was created. I have done arbitration for many years since the year 83 onwards, you know. There are so many concepts. Section 8, application, all right. Section 13, now, then, oh, there are so many, 29. Now, 8 and the 30 are, 8 is for application for appointed arbitrators, as per the Wood Act. 30 is for setting aside an award. All right. In between, there are so many provisions, okay. On section 8, we will find 3-4 volumes written. And so on section 13. Now, it has percolated down. Now, they wanted to sort of combine the international arbitration and local arbitration into one compact act called the Lottery Regulation Act 1996. It's the same story. But the same story now, there's so many judgments. I'll just refer to one of them just now as we come on to the next topic. See, there are things which court have to interpret, you know, on that provision. Interpret. See, I have to touch interpretation because these two are interconnected. Legislation drafting and interpretation, they are interconnected. So that's what, you know, the judiciary faces. Lawyers, as you know, they will throw things at you, and then with all respects, because we are, you know, two sides of the same coin, they say, but throw it at us, and it's left on us to decide whether that's right or not. We'll have to analyze the judgment, the facts, okay, and then pass a reasoned judgment. I can just read it like that, because our judgments are again appealable, okay, and when it's appealed against, we shouldn't look like fools over there, you know, and get some castigation from a higher forum. Alright, so and ultimately it is the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court should not say what fools are these, you know. So we have to read both sides, analyze the facts, what are the laws involved, you know, then pass the judgment. So these are the things that go on. Now, other aspect is that, as I was saying, another problem with the language. Now, as I've said, the convenience of the public, draftsmen ought to use language that is not so esoteric. You know, it shouldn't be so, you know, esoteric means something specialized from a language, understood by some specialized people, you know. It should be a language which an ordinary citizen can understand. Okay, and those citizens who are the litigant citizens who come to court for settlement of dispute, and they should understand what the law that they are canvassing, so as their case is concerned. What is it that it applies? Now, in India, in Sikkim, of course, I think it's universal everywhere, because the litigant public, they are guided by the councils. So they run our council. Whatever the council says, whether right or wrong, they say razor. No. Okay, now the problem is they don't know what the law is, because it is such complex English language. Alright, and then so, because majority of them do not know the English language, which is the language of the court. In the court also lawyers speak, they don't know what to speak, they just sit down and listen. But there are some educated litigants, they do understand, they follow, but still they can't follow. I know so many educated persons who have come to me seeking advice, you know, and we have to tell them simple things they don't understand. So therefore, what happens is that the language is a very serious problem, despite there being constitutional provisions. Now I'll come to that, you know. I've quoted the Roman law in magazine. Because it's very dangerous, because you can't say come to court and say I didn't know the law. There's a presumption that you know the law. Okay. So in that circumstance, it becomes all the more important for a litigating public that he knows the law, which he is canvassing. Otherwise, you know, he suffers because of the canon which has been established. Right? Maxim saying that ignorance fact, you can plead ignorance, you cannot plead ignorance of law. But you can, of course, you can ignorance of fact, you can plead it. But that's different matter. But fact, basically what they say, ignorance of law is no excuse. There's another saying of there's a Roman terminology, I don't remember. Okay. Then yes, now on that again coming touching to that discussion. If there was unbridled freedom of the members to express the views clearly and it is received healthily, okay, then what happens is sometimes the good amendments that have been proposed or objections to the amendments that are made would have given a result to a good law being passed. Right. Now, the famous Keshav Nanda Bharati case. There's an objection to Article 31C. Okay, they said that you cannot call in question. There is no law containing a declaration that is for giving effect to such a policy. There was a policy decision taken. Okay, so now there is a leading case, as you know, 9 judges bench. Okay. Now that is the case which has settled the principle called the basic feature. Okay. Now, so therefore, now that of course, that previous judgment in Goloknath's case, we said that fundamental rights, even fundamental rights can be amended. That was by implication overridden by superseded by the judgment. So this was not listened to, heard. Okay, this objection was not heard. And as a consequence, what happened? The amendment, the 25th bill was passed in 71. Then it was struck down, as I was saying, as unconstitutional. The basic structure, that concept, that doctrine, took birth with that. And so then after that, so many have come, like Minar O'Neill and all that. So therefore, the problem arises when there is no wise kind of a conversation in the legislature, and that is getting worse now. In fact, I'm noticing. I'm not only here, just in America, it's happening. They are going crazy. See, when there is no when you don't lend ear to the people's voice, it's represented by the members of the Congress, members of the the Senate. They have to listen. They have to listen, but they don't listen. They say, okay, forget it. What I say is right. So as a consequence, so many conflicts happening all over the world now. Trade, is suffering. There's a massive trade war going on. All the countries are, all over Europe is doldrums. Russia, India, of course, is feeling the pinch, but they're not saying it much. They are feeling India feeling the pinch. Canada, the war going on between them, and basically this is a trade war going on. So this results when the deliberating legislature is supposed to deliberate on the wisdom of certain action. Do not deliberate wisely. So then this is what happens. So I've given the reference. This Goloknath I forward 69. So earlier, this how we developed this drafting system. Earlier, we are following English, so I'm going to give a bit of the history. Now this all, you read books, you find all this, okay, Hayden's Law, this, or whatever I've written here. You find these materials in the books. With England, drafting legislation was done by the judges. Just imagine, judges read, okay. Then it continued to the 15th century. Then, now, when the judges don't listen to the House of Commons. It started in Cromwell's period. The House began like that. So they were not taking the Commons into confidence. So there was a conflict between the Crown and the the Commons. So then they discontinued from Henry VII's period. Then they discontinued. Then it was handed over to another agency called Department. It was being drafted by the concerned department to which the legislation related to. Now when that happens, what happens is, he would only look, that ministry would look, that department would look into the interest of its own department only. It would not consider how it's going to affect the other departments. Again there was a conflict. Okay. So then ultimately what happened, they formed a centralized agency and called the Office of the Parliamentary Council to the Treasury. Okay. So they started making the bills, the law. Then in our country, we were ruled by them only, colonial law. So it was earlier the legislative department. Then that legislative department became Lord Ministry of Law. But the legislative department continued as a department of the Ministry of Law. Now it still continues, okay? And they have, it is again headed by a secretary. And it is manned by a group of experts in legislation or trained people. So there is a specialized agency which drafts our legislations. Now I have already discussed on the this next one, pre-legislative phase, legislative phase, post-legislative. So I will not delay. So pre means you conceive the law, the policy, then the law, then it's legislative phase. That law is discussed in the form of bill by the minister concerned, and the post-legislative is the period when the wisdom of that law may be challenged. Okay. I will not repeat this. 10 is the same thing which I have discussed with you. The same 11 was the same thing. Okay. Now I have quoted one, very nice, compact, view of Mr. Justice Vijay Kumar, for Calcutta, Judge of the Allahabad High Court. Just read it. It's so nice, He said, a legislative draftsman has to be a very knowledgeable person. Okay. He must have a grip over constitutional provision. Yes, the person has to have a sound knowledge of the constitution, the statute, and other facts which are relevant to these. Okay. And that he must have in mind likely future need and how to provide some play in provision to cover such future exigencies without impairing the present purpose for which the legislation has been sought. Now when you ask for a legislation on a particular subject, you cannot be just have a blinkers, and just think of that moment in time, that today. What's going to happen after 50 years, maybe 100 years, that has to be envisaged, and then a provision made where it could be sort of expanded. So, though he has to think of that, so that is suggestions made. He cannot, like I've said, he cannot narrow down too much, not too much expanded. He has to strike balance on the whole. There are so many technical things which are involved, it's difficult to elaborate. So, therefore, this is very nicely, summarized. That's why I thought I must let you know. You also read it. I got this from one of the journals of the Academy of India. I was going through it. So this is it. Now, just a moment. Now, while doing that, while making legislation, few things you have to mention. As you see, like when you write judgment also, it's similar to that. Say, what do? First, we give the brief facts of the case. Then we note down the worrying fact, pleadings. Okay. Then the submissions, the law which has been placed in support of the cases. Then after that we discuss on that. Then we give the final. Okay. Similarly, in a law, what we do when they say that arrangements of the provision, okay, so they are making mention what are the specific arrangement, their sequence, how do you place, okay, and to have proper exceptions. Now, like I say, there has to be some exceptions, explanations and provisos. Now, sometimes what happens, the law may not, if you leave it like that, there is room for ambiguity, possibility of it being, interpreted in two different forms or maybe three different forms. Now, to avoid that, they give a proviso. Then similarly, they also give explanations. So these are the, at times, some non-obstante clause. Like for example, what happens is you have exclusive provision. Now sometimes you see that, okay, how can you do this if there are other provisions, which are made sometimes contrary. Okay? So there we say, okay, notwithstanding anything contained in this act anywhere. Okay. So that covers that part. So that's why, like for example, in Sikkim, this non-obstante clause is very famous, because of the Article 371, okay. Everyone talks of Sikkim, Article 371. Everyone is a master. What is 371 life? Okay. And what is non-obstante clause? Yes, indeed true. Because there are, see, we are saying that no, we are, we have this provision which says that laws which are in force in Sikkim shall continue in force. Now, whether those laws, if they are in conflict with Part 3, what happens? Now, this was decided in Surendra Prasad's case. Fortunately, I had the fortune to participate in that case, Okay, then in that case, the rule for Sikkim national, that was being challenged. Whether how can they be Sikkim national when we are part of India? How can they be a sort of special treatment, okay, for a citizen of one state with another? Those kinds of questions came up. Then ultimately, Supreme Court says very important for those the persons who are in Sikkim, where Sikkim is okay. It says that Article 371F contains the the conditionalities of the terms of merger. Okay. The other one is it reflects the solemn promise given by the government of India to the people of Sikkim. Read paragraph 24 of that judgment. It's clearly given. So, therefore, this non-substantive clause has been provided to ensure that the way of life is not disturbed. It continues in the manner it had continued, okay, and we do not disturb it. Of course, with passage of time, things would be, work itself out by various means, laws will be passed and things like that. So, these are the things. But the primary, there are two leading cases in Sikkim. Article 371 is concerned. One is R.C. Powell's case, which gives the entire background with the scope of Article 371F. It is in the context of Article small f of 371FF. Okay. Now that is regarding the representation in the assembly. Now that was challenged by Mr. Powell, saying that the representation given to the beer community is in excess of the proportion of the population. So we got analyzed everything and then interpreted what is 371F. It is not like it's a special provision, that's why, not even transitory. It is special. So therefore, why it is special is because of this reason, because it's historical perspectives and so many things are there. But primarily they said that it is different from the others. So for that is more of a political arrangement than an arrangement in terms of constitution. So the substance of the finding is there. So non-obstante clause plays a very vital role in a litigation and in a legislation. So as I was saying, that time I said, but all is so simple. Different situations to be met, making necessary to make use of the ifs and buts, exceptions, explanations and provisos, etc. In any case, if due care is taken, use of things can certainly be minimized. One would often find that the provision is so lengthy, provision is so lengthy that by the time one reaches the last line or clause, he would forget how it had started. This has happened to me, I don't know, it has happened many times. You start reading, you come again, go back. So what I had to do was, I had to break this, that particular provision to clauses, small substances, because see, sentence is built by clauses, okay? And basically clauses are there. So these clauses are broken, which gives a separate intention. So let's break that to understand that whole thing, So therefore, one needs to apply a mind, and then therefore there is a need for all this exception, explanation, provisos. then he says that okay, as far as possible, don't resort to this. Try to avoid the use of these things. You know. So I think I shot over your family. So I'll just come to the end because there's nothing much to say. Now, okay, the next topic is going. I think if anyone else would like to say anything on this, you're please welcome. Your experience, okay, which I could be of assistance to unravel. Many of you facing, young people over there. What is the problem that you are facing? And these kind of matters, legislation. Okay. Is there anything I can be of assistance? Please ask me. If there's none, then we'll call it a day for the time being. Now, next session, to begin with, the key principles statutory interpretation. Now, again I'll ask one of you, okay, what is the key principle of statutory provision? What do you mean by it? Young people over there, any idea? You must be having, because you were fresh out of, more fresh I would say than the others out of college. Whatever you think is right, wrong, what I don't feel embarrassed, say what you feel is what is statutory interpretation and its key principles.
Lordship, it is to interpret the law as is in a very simple manner, as the law is written, and not to get too much into it, but as it is. One of the key principles.
You're right. You're right. Anyone else? Subarna, what are you doing?
Lordship, I think when we are interpreting statutes, it's also very important for us to look at the objects and the statement of objects and reasons behind the legislation also.
Correct. That also, you're also correct. There's another aspect, okay? Anyone else? Supplement. What about you? You're quietly listening only.
Lordship, interpretation would also include to read between the lines and not just going on to the face value, because we have different kind of interpretation like mischief rule, golden rule of interpretation. So not reading the head notes, footnotes, all those would also be considered.
Yes. You're right. That's also correct. Golden rule is another one. See okay now. Key principles of statutory interpretation. Basically, what I think the young lady over there, what's your name? I forget your name.
Mahima.
Pardon? Mahima. She said, just to interpret the statutory provisions in a language which is simple. All right. Now, the language we don't use, but the language is used by the legislation, what is there. Now, the key principle, how do you interpret it? Like you said that you read between the lines, okay? Then you said there are golden rules. There are 3-4 principles which we will discuss. Now, interpretation, now I've just given you the text, okay? That's more or less same thing. I've read the same books, okay? I've read GP, mostly I've taken from GP Singh. I've read N.S. Bindra, okay? And I've read some, there are some write-up in the, research materials that I got. There, they have summarized it, okay? I'm not too happy with some of the summarization, but then it is better than nothing. I said to you, at least you put it because you all will understand. So, but there are some things which are very important because now it's the practical aspect of it. That one was, more of an abstract, okay, theoretical. Now, how do we interpret that? Is that the interpretive statute, by the very words, mean to interpret the laws? Is to interpret the laws, okay? In the first session, we had discussed on the general principles of legislation, legislation drafting. Please correct that. The legislation drafting, and while doing so, we have noted that drafting of legislation is intricate work. It's not a simple thing. The draftsman would require to have a good knowledge and general idea of statutes and other laws as well as the constitution, combined with a good command over the language. So this command over the language is very vital. You got to have knowledge of law, definitely. Constitution, why constitution is because primarily the list, the legislative competence, whether state legislature, whether it covers the part 2, or even under the concurrent list, part 3, or if it's part 1, you're out of it, okay? If it's parliament, whether it's part 1, if it's in part 1, naturally the parliament has the power, has the legislative power. Sometimes, of course, the law says that part 2 provision also can be legislated upon by the parliament. But again, it's state law. There are a lot of I have decided one case in High Court here. So recently, I think, Karu, you have mentioned one judgment of Supreme Court where my judgment was upheld as regards the sales tax, Now, yeah, so I said, there is sometimes what happens, it overlaps. You may be passing a judgment on a sort of a law which, when you look at it per se, it appears as list 1. But it will fall under the list 2 also, because incidentally, if you, but it's not straight away, but when you're making a law under the list as provided in part 2, sometimes you enter in the domain of part 1, then that would be permissible, so long as it's not conflict. So because the object has to be met. So that is what, essentially that was the judgment. There's a purely question of law, which is argued. So there, when you say consider the constitutional provisions means, one of them is whether they have the competence to pass a law. So while doing that, of course, then the final things come, whether is it a central encroachment or is it a direct encroachment, okay. But the central said Parliament has the jurisdiction to pass a law which may be there in part 2 also, that overrides it. Then they have the paramount power. Then he has to have a good language, because he cannot express it. If he doesn't express it properly, then it doesn't convey what the law means, so that people understand. So these are few things which the draftsman, or rather crucial things which the draftsman has to have. What do you call that? That quality. Others is goes. So the next, I have referred to one judgment. This there you'll find it in the in the literatures all over. You said that 1996 that Vishnu Pratap Shoe Works Private Limited statutes an edict of the legislature. That time I said, why is it an edict of the legislature? Yes, an edict means a command of the legislature, because legislature is given the topmost priority because it is the will of the people. It represents the people, and we are governed by, we are a democracy, so the government, the parliament represents, or the legislature represents the people. It is not that they are made kings, to rule us. It is we rule them, because you are our spokesman. You know how, you all have read the basic, what do you call that, literature on, the evolution of democracy. When you read Plato, Aristotle, earlier in Athens, they used to have, people used to gather, like we have Zomsai here, People used to gather and they used to decide the policy, be it taxation or mainly taxation, in the law that govern the society, otherwise. So that was decided by the people when gathered together. But that became impossible, because then as we started adopting that way of, kind of government, then it became impossible. The French Revolution, as you know, that started. And then when you wanted to have a representative democracy, and when you wanted to have a democracy of that sort, it actually opted to a representative democracy. So that's how we go in for elections. People get together, we will send this fellow to represent us. Now, in the modern, in Sikkim, in India, we govern a multi-party system like in England or in the US, okay? But more in India because we have so many political parties. Now each will come with an ideology. We say that we'll do this and our ideology is this, okay? People will accept that person's ideology whom they find it's good for them, according to the elect. That is the theory, of course. In practice, something else happens. You just don't know. Ban some yojana in Madhya Pradesh, okay, and all those kind of things come in. So, whereas actually the ideology is the primary moving factor for election in a government. So when they come to the assembly or the parliament, they represent those people, and when they voice their opinion, it's they who are actually voicing the opinion. That's why it is given that's called the edict of the legislation. That's even the Supreme Court has held that, and we are not supposed to add or alter any of the provisions or law which has been passed by the parliament. Because that job is not ours. Our job is to expound and not to legislate. We, what do you call that, interpret what they mean so that it can be usefully implemented. So then comes the legislation. The legislator is legislation. Okay, this percent. Thus, assembly two aspects. In one, it carries the concept of meaning. So legislation carries two meanings. Okay. Then other is the purpose and object. Now, as you develop and will gradually develop into those principles, So what this means, they have combined both literal and purpose. Now, what happens is there are two principles of amongst the principles. There are two principles. One is the literal principle. Now, literal principle means read the provision as it is and give it a literal meaning. And if that comes in the way or results in absurdity or doesn't make any sense, then you go into what is the purpose of that legislation. And the purpose of legislation you can only gather if we look into the entire statute book, okay, and the objects and reasons of the law which has been passed by the parliament. Normally, see, there are so many judgments to say, the Supreme Court has said, that we do not rely upon objects and reasons. But when the crunch comes, even the Supreme Court has to rely on, what was the objective? What was the purpose of passing that law? So, therefore, in order to interpret that legislation, we assimilate these two, combine, and then interpret. Later on, it expands into further, principles. Then it says the purpose of construction therefore combines both literal and purposive approaches. True or legal meaning of an enactment is derived by considering the meaning of the words used in it. So the meaning is very important. Now, only meaning is not sufficient, but what's the purpose? So two things have to be combined. So in the light of any discernible purpose, that's what I'm saying, So meaning and then discernible purpose, which comprehends the mischief and its remedy. Now, the mischief is another concept. Now that was conceived in the Hayden's law, What is mischief? We'll come to that also. Mischief is like, for example, what is the past wrong? What is the lacuna? Okay, and what was that? Does that present legislation correct that lacuna, fill up the lacuna, or correct the error that was there in the past, or not only error, maybe gap in the legislation. So these are the things, the manner in which the legislation gets interpreted primarily, right? It does it fair, no, it's not fair, it's fair and legitimate to conclude that the intention of legislation can be determined keeping in mind the purpose of the object of the act. So I was saying, so you've got to have the object, the purpose. It has been held that the bare mechanical interpretation of the words and application of legislative intent devoid of purpose will reduce most of the remedial beneficial legislative futility. Now this deciding, this organo, I'm carrying it because this is very interesting observation by Krishna Iyer in his inimitable style. He says, to be literal in meaning is to see the skin and miss the soul. It's quoted in that. Beautiful. So you just look at the skin, so you don't know the actual soul, what that is. So what the skin covers, So although little meaning approach is one of the principal statutory interpretation, it may be disregarded only if it conflicts. Okay, it's an essential requirement of fair play, natural justice, which the legislature, never intend to ignore. So we generally accept this principle unless it conflicts with something, with an essential requirement. Like it should not be in violation of natural justice and all that. The statute must be read in, as you know, we understand the statute. You have to read it as a whole. You can't just break it into parts to give a true meaning. Sometimes what happens, one sentence may have different meaning, then it will be something else. So you read the statute as a whole, act, and then you get what it would mean. So the intention of the legislature must be found by reading the statute as a whole when the question arises as to the meaning of the certain provision of the statute. So sometimes the meaning you find it difficult. So when you read this law as a whole, the theme of that act would give you a hint at the meaning of that particular provision. Now, so the provision has to be read in its context. Now, the contextual part has to be considered. Okay, and it says the previous law, state of the law, like the mischief rule, all statute having similar provisions, the general scope of statute, and the mischief that intended to remedy. So if you read all that, see, like I was saying, if you, for instance, examine what was the law that previously existed, and what this law proposes to do. Does that law did have any lacuna, any I would say, provision which are not correctly put in, let's put it that in a simple fashion, okay? So has that been corrected or not? This has to be examined. And so that can be understood only if you read the whole provision of the Act. So another thing is that once reading that alone is not sufficient. Whether it makes it effectively workable, whether it can be put into, implemented or not, does it serve public purpose, does it serve public interest? These have to be looked into. Principle requires that presumption exists that a statute is constitutional, and passed with the competence of the legislature. So the constitutionality of the law is to be upheld, first object, and then whether that it is passed by legislature having competence. These two are generally assumptions. This has been argued. Courts have always consistently held this. The courts have never tried to repeal a law, strike down a law saying that it is unconstitutional. Generally, the courts have tried to hold a provision to be constitutional, unless for some other serious reason. So there has a consistent approach. In hardly any cases where statute is declared. Very few. Like for example, now I just give you the glaring ones. One of that famous Keshavananda Bharati's case, only provision was struck down. Despite there is recorded in the parliamentary proceedings that provision was unconstitutional. It restricts the independence of the judiciary in exercise as judicial, interpretation of a provision. Okay, the term. Anyway, so basically the power of the judiciary to examine the constitutionality provision gets curtailed. So he said you cannot question before any law, any court. That was the provision. So that was the provision which was counter to the basic feature. So that was struck down. So according to that, only thing has to be seen. Under such the courts prefer to give meaning to such provisions and avoid striking it down. The courts have been reluctant to hold a provision to be ambiguous, but rather adopted an approach to give purposive construction to statutes. Like, so purpose becomes very important, like all the time, the object, what is the object of that law? So they will not, even if suppose there is some vagueness, in the provision, they will try to look into the justification of it, and whether it is ancillary to any other provision, so that it becomes constitutional. Okay. So they don't strike it down. Now I'll give you one example, a case which I am very familiar with because I was doing those lottery matters in other occasion. Sikkim was involved in this lottery trade, and we were not governed by any act those days. It was free, there was no tax, nothing. Then case came up by Suman Enterprises, state of Haryana. This was 1994. You see the judgment. Now in that, what happened? They challenged the lottery, and court in an interim order passed a very substantive direction, saying that all lotteries must come within the regulatory framework. It said that it is betting, though it is pernicious in character, but only the saving grace was because it was organized by the state government. So for that reason, certain guidelines were given, but it ensured that it was made sure that one of the conditions that was laid down was that all revenues earned should be routed through the state exchequer. So that condition, that's what interim order passed the Supreme Court and became a very leading case. And based on that, the Lottery Conciliation Regulation Act 1996 was passed. Right. Now this Conciliation Act 1996 came to be questioned, Section 4 and 5 particularly, came to be questioned in BR Enterprises case in UP. Now, UP said it does not conflict. Okay, it is permissible. What happened by that section? State, they barred sale of lotteries. They barred sale of lotteries, and then so as a consequence, but then they were doing their own lottery. The other states could not. There are 19 petitions, other writ petitions combined with it in this judgment. So it was held, but now again, so that's another thing, the innovation of the judiciary to save that provision. There's a thing called reading down, reading down a provision. What happened in Section 5, it says that the state can prohibit sale of lotteries in the state. Now what it didn't specifically say was that whether while barring the others, can you run a lottery? Now that question was left open, and that was being taken advantage of by the states, like Karnataka and all. But Karnataka, for you to surprise to know, they also barred their own. So ultimately the Supreme Court held, say that you must read down into this provision and say that when you bar other states, you are barring yourself also. That means it should be lottery-free zone. So that's what these BR. So this is innovation. So therefore, court has to, try to uphold a provision rather than strike it down. Otherwise, just a simple thing. If you go straight by the literal meaning, that means it's very discriminatory. You are doing your own. You are not allowing the others. This is not permissible. You would have struck it down, but the court said no. This is the Supreme Court. There, they said that you cannot do this. You have to read down this provision saying that when you bar the others, you bar yourself also. Then only you can. If you only bar yourself, can you bar the others? That is the substance of the finding in BR Enterprise. Of course, then there are other issues, whether the lottery is a Rex commercial under Article 301 with all the laws there. But primary, this for the purpose of our case, our talk here, this particular concept is very important. Now you can note down the BR Enterprises. This has to carry it. Oh, it's not here. This is AIR 1999 Supreme Court 187. Okay. So, then SEC also, but the SEC is, I didn't have that particular volume, it's volume 8, it's not there with me. So, now, if we, when we, like, you know, when you consider morning stock and when you consider now what we have discussed, it would seem that, you know, there's no impediment, you know, no difficulty in the application of the statutes, very various questions. But then, let us say, various questions did arise. Lots of things. Volumes I'm now saying, you know. Interpretation of statute refers to the process of understanding and giving to the provisions of law or statute. That's what we found. The laws are drafted by experts having knowledge, sound knowledge of law, to give expression to the policies enunciated by the legislature and in their own perception. So far as they are concerned, they find the language in the statute to be clear and unambiguous because they feel when the ones who have drafted it, he thinks I have prepared it in such a way that it is very clear. Okay. This has given rise, our problem has arisen. Despite all that clarity, problems have arisen while implementing that law. Rise to need for interpretation of those statutes, like I expressed to this Beer Enterprises matter, by the courts, judges and legal professions while resolving disputes or applying the law in specific cases. So it is not that, you know, everything looks fine. But then, see, one of the things is the, I would say, a lawyer's ingenuity, you know. We do create, I was a lawyer also, defense lawyer, then I was also government lawyer, I did all sort of things. As a defense lawyer, we tried to create confusion in the mind of the court. Basically, we tried to create confusion. So other side looks a little flummoxed, okay, they don't know how to answer it, and then leave the entire thing upon the court. So, and that gives, that give rise to the, burden on the court to interpret that. So therefore, the questions do arise like that, So there's nothing like everything's clear. You can, even a comma, we say this comma, why is there? That means there's a punctuation. Punctuation means something else. So we have to read this provision disjunctively, we say, So then the judge has to think. This doesn't make some sense. This first clause is something else, this after clause, after comma is something else. Little knowing that comma is just a pause, Because it becomes long, so you give a pause and then you continue with the same tenor. Okay, so then these things happen. Judges, when I was a lawyer, I did it. I mean, honestly, when I did it, I managed to confuse some of the judges. And that gives a lot of thrill. You say, the judge looks sick, But we don't have the harder one that I'm wrong, So that gives, what I'm saying, trying to aim at the lighter vein, I said it, without meaning any insult to any of the honorable judges. But it happens. It has happened to me as a judge. Okay, so I'm telling you. So then like just Mr. Siddharth Sankarai, with whom I appeared in many cases, he said, my friend have very successfully cast a veil of clouds across the mountains, saying, now my duty is to clear the veil. So the judges have to work hard to clear the veil so that you see the figure clearly. Like here we were arguing a case, I remember it was during the month of October, and son was like, one of the lottery cases only, I remember. So I was appearing as advocate, he was serving with a lottery company. So we argued that matter, and then that was the time when other side made a very lengthy argument, made a lot of impact. Court was quite impressed, So then I was a little getting worried. Then he rose. Siddharth Sankarai is a different class altogether. He's very smiling. He said, "This term, you can see the mountains and the Kanchenjunga very clearly. With that time, that lower structure had not come. We are in the upper one, court room number 1. Court room number 1 is where now, and that is no more also, because that is demolished. So from there, the Kanchenjunga could see very clearly. Clear the mountains. So that is a beautiful term. So the burden is on the judges to clear the veil and try to incorporate law, what you call, pierce the veil to discover the corporate, what you call, entity. So it comes in some form, then the job of the court is to clear it and find out actually what it is. Is it a private limited company? Is it an individual company? That kind of thing. So this piercing the veil actually is concept of corporate law. So that's how it's happened. Okay. And the interpretation of statute, as you know, is very crucial. It has to be consistent, predictable, and fair. Why? Because it affects so many people. It affects people, lives of people, business, government entities, bodies. Okay, regarding the rights, obligations, responsibility. So the implication is very heavy. So for that reason, the law has to be sort of framed very cautiously, and while interpreting also, we have to keep that in mind. Now, principles of the interpretation statute. Now we come to more in concrete form. This is the courts play a vital role in interpreting statutes and assigning meaning to them in a manner that makes them practical and usable. Okay, so we try to. The courts have interpreted that way. So because it was like, for example, we have followed so many judgments. We say, okay, in that document it's things like that. So it's very convenient to be right. Now that's how it is done. It's interpreted in that fashion. Courts cannot exercise the interpret function arbitrarily now. If you do it arbitrarily, what I think, I cannot think just what I think should not be just the sole criteria of coming to a decision. You have to consider other judgments, other situations, other with the conflict of decisions, creating inconsistencies. Okay, and hinder equal administration of justice. So, therefore, one needs to be very careful when we interpret law. It cannot be done arbitrarily. Arbitrarily means if these are things without any consideration, you come to a decision. That's not the way. You think, you have a wide ambit, survey, and then come to a decision. So, to ensure consistency, okay. Then the ensure consistency, as noted about earlier, the courts have developed certain principles. Now, in order to how to go over it, you need certain guidelines, like for example, the law says you have a right to certain activity. Okay. Now, does it mean you can do that activity just like that in whatever manner you want? It can't be done. So there are certain guidelines, restrictions, okay, that you need to keep in mind. Now that's exactly what, while interpreting the judgments, courts have evolved certain principles. Now those principles are most common. There are so many small things, but they primarily are the literal rule, the mischief rule, the golden rule, and the rule of harmonious construction. Like you have mentioned that time, all these are here. Now literal rule we have already discussed in quite a length, that it means giving meaning to the ordinary meaning to the word that appears in a statute. Next, 13, you will say the fundamental principle of literal rule of interpretation is to assign words their natural, original, and precise meaning, provided that the words are clear and take into account the purpose of the statute. You will see that very simply. This rule says that the provision should be examined in their literal sense and given their natural effect. That is generally, that's the best thing, that manner in which you should proceed. It also referred to as the plain reading rule, which means that provisions should be read as they are without any addition or substitution words during interpretation. Now I have taken some of these from those Google Baba materials, because I found that most of them are taken from these books only, the other books which I mentioned. See, the leading books are the G.P. Singh is there, N.S. Bindra, okay, then Chatterjee's book is there, and some other small, I've got a number of them with me. So I examined all of them. Now because I have to give a talk to you, I can't talk nonsense, right? So, so what I did was, I looked through all that, I made my notes, then I said, let me see what there in Google Baba. Now Google Baba came out with so many things, but some of them are very good. There's one called Law Bhumi, okay, please check down. Law Bhumi you can subscribe also. That is very quite good. I read it was well researched. Yes, these things I've taken some of them from that one. There's nothing guys, it is, it's open. That's a web page we can take as well. It's very good. Have you read that? Have you read? You read it. Okay, there are others also. Okay, but then Law Bhumi I found it good. Others, they were a little, I would say, little spurious, mixed up, and not very correctly interpreted. But this one I found okay. That was because after having read all that, so I wanted something summarization. So I was looking at this. I did my own little bit over. Then I found this to be good. I said, let me put down some and take it, adapt it from there. So essence of the little rule can be summarized, should be what the law says rather than what the law means. So law means what means, like the word meaning is something. But what it says, like dead letter meaning, this is something. But what it says, what is its substance? That is very important for us to consider. Okay. When giving such a literal interpretation, the overall purpose, like I say, overall purpose of approach, there's another one. Now the purpose of the approach becomes, common to many of these principles. Approach must be taken into consideration. Then Halden's observation is if the language used has a natural. Now this has been quoted in one of these Google Baba thing. Okay, that's what I liked it. That's why I put it down. Has natural meaning. We cannot deviate from the meaning unless, when reading the set as a whole, the context directs us to do so. So, should not deviate unless something said some other purpose. Okay. Now, Tata consultancy is a matter which is referred there, but I have referred it. I have read it earlier because this is a constitutional bench judgment. It says the literal construction should be denied simply because complying with it may result in a penalty. The court should not be eager to find ambiguities or obscurity in plain meaning. I'll just read out there's some part of it. This is very good, that's why I found it. Please take, I think you got the, you got the reference here. See, this begins like this: in interpreting an expression and in a legal sense, the courts are required to ascertain the precise connotation which it possesses in law. It further tried that a court should not be overzealous in searching for ambiguities or obscurities. We should not look for defects, We should try to look for it. Then it says that further try, that it is now well settled that when the expression is capable of more than one meaning, the court would attempt to resolve that ambiguity in a manner consistent with the purpose of the provisions and with regard to the consequence of the alternative construction. So this, then kindly look at this judgment. It's very good for you all. Okay, for to give you an idea. The paras are 67, 68, 69, 73, and 76. This is the judgment. Justice Sinha's view is that you should not look for ambiguities. You shouldn't go overzealous. Try to find out where the judgment, where it is wrong. Where the judgment, decisions has gone wrong. So the literal rule. These are the conditions. Statute must have a section for interpreting interpretation. Then we have the definition. Special being provided that there's a definition. Then the statute does not provide specific definition. Technical words should be given their technical meaning. Words should not be inserted through implications. You cannot imply things and put it in. You just use it as it appears. Over time, words may undergo shifts in meaning. Like what happens? These words, certain words used in an act, over time, over a period of time, they assume some other meaning. It becomes widened, and so you have to keep that your mind open. Then you should recognize that words derive significance from their context. So context has to be read. So we have discussed this at quite length in the morning as well as just some time back. So this rule somewhat restricts the interpretation process and makes it inflexible in its purest form. If you go clearly by the literal meaning, then you are stuck. Okay. Additional criticism of this rule stems from the assumption that words have fixed meaning, which is erroneous, as a single word may have multiple meanings depending on the different context. That is homograph. Somewhere, like for example, one word may have two different meanings. Like for example, one word, same word, but may have different meanings, also pronunciation different. Like for example, the word bow, B-O-W, we say one is bow, okay, that is bow, the other is bow. So these are homographs. So there also you have to meet. These are things which comes. I've just made instances of this so that you keep this hope will remain in your mind. It doesn't forget after eating this later. Okay. Then the mischief rule. Now this next is mischief rule. Now mischief rule focuses on determining the intention of lawmakers during the interpretation of statutes. It originated in the United Kingdom 16th century as Hayden's law. It was held that the primary interpreting a statute should be to identify the mischief and defect. Okay, that the statute intended to address and provide effective remedy. This rule seeks to answer the question of what problem the previous law failed to cover, leading to the enactment of the statute in question. So Hayden's law is basically the overcome the mischief of the past. So you have to read that to see what is the mischief, what is the old law, what this present law intends to do with that particular law. And so this is the mischief rule basically. The word is used like that. It sounds very exotic, mischief rule. But it's a very simple thing, What is the mischief is, what is the effect? Well, that's what we're trying to correct. The Hayden's have laid down these points. We have already discussed on this. Common law, because you think Hayden's law means it's English law. So England, they had common law. Okay, now the common law, when the common law came about, then the new laws are passed. Now, when the law was passed, then that was discussed. Okay, so that the same thing, the principle. What the remedy, the mischief, the remedy, and all that. So. So this Hayden's rule, certain flexibility is given because then court could consider, the action could they could decide more flexibility because they cannot stuck like the literal rule. You have to go strictly as per the term, like Iyer said, Justice Iyer, you looking at the skin and missing the soul, So the literal meaning, sometimes if you just go by it, then you forget. You are not able to see what actually it intends to do. So therefore this Hayden rule gives you a flexibility to see what it actually intends to, or what is the intention of that particular legislation. Was it to cover some mischief of the past, that there were lacuna in the law? So these are the things which provide the court with that liberty. Now the golden rule, Now the golden rule is where I had that BR Enterprises block. He says that golden rule provides flexibility in interpretation process by allowing deviation of literal rule, meaning of words, to avoid absurd outcomes. Now they come the absurd, like for example BR Enterprises. If I will not allow others to come. It's like a dog in a manger, So you allow, I'll do my business, you can't come. So that can't be the law that hits Article 14 directly. So, as a consequence, court interpreted to mean, read it down to mean that if you prevent others, you first prevent yourself. By yourself, then you will get by others. So that's what the golden rule is essentially is about. He said the golden rule provides flexibility in the interpretation process by allowing deviation of literal meaning of words to avoid absurd outcomes. In other words, this rule permits a judge to depart from the ordinary meaning of a word when interpreting it would lead to an unreasonable result. Okay, the golden rule serves as a compromise between the literal rule and the mischief rule. If general rule gives right words, their plain and ordinary meaning, but allows for deviation when adhering strictly to the literal meaning, which lead to an irrational outcome contrary to its literal intent. So, therefore, it is to harmonize the provisions. So the principle harmonize the harmony in what you call that statutory provision is a well established principle. We have applied, in enough number of times, enough number of cases, we find a lot of judgment on that. So the harmonious construction of the statute has to be applied whenever there is some sort of conflict. Try to, it's a conflict not only that in itself, but conflict in the context of the provisions and all the other statutes. So when there's something like that, we try to bring about harmony in this provision so that we do not strike it down as being unconstitutional. Basically, that is the intent. So narrow sense, as the golden rule, narrow sense is applied to ambiguous words, and wide use occurs when the rule is applied to avoid outcomes that are contrary to the policy. I'll say, the policy, it cannot be, just like enterprises KBR. I still say it. But the policy was you banned. Okay. But you cannot, like the Supreme Court came down and said that, okay, you can ban only if you ban us all. So that is, it would be contrary to the policy, public policy, and hitting Article 14. So these have to be the broader principles that needs to be examined. Okay. So in order to ensure that ensure that the law is meant what it is to be, meant to sort of what do you call that, serve public purpose. You cannot serve. There are 19. In that case, there were 19 cases. Some coming from Haryana, some from UP, many from UP, and some from Karnataka. 19 cases, all the same question. The Section 5 barred it. They barred others. They didn't bar themselves. So they have making merry on it. So because you can't do it. Again, on the harmonious construction, the rule of harmonious construction applied when there is a conflict between the two or more statutes or different parts of the same. And as I've said, suppose there is some conflict between two statutes or within the statute itself. In such case, the provisions should be interpreted in a way that harmonizes them, giving effect to all provisions up to the greatest extent possible. Okay. The rule is based on the premises that each statute has a purpose and should be read as a whole. So, provisions, cannot be read in isolation. The whole provision has to be read so that it makes sense, So, therefore, that is the principle of this, the principle behind this harmonious construction. And with provision interpreted consistently, interpretation should not render any provision useless or use one provision to defeat the other unless there is a way to criticize the difference. So therefore you have to ensure that these are held to be legal, it's constitutional, and should not be struck down, and by resorting to this particular principle, harmonious construction again. So therefore I have also referred to one judgment. I think you can go through this. This is the CIT case of 2002 Supreme Court. The courts must avoid direct conflict between seemingly contradictory provisions, but must interpret them in a way that harmonizes them. Same thing. So this very essential principles, quite boring to listen. I start drooping after some time, okay? But it's so useful in your life in the long run, Okay, now conclusion. Now I'm going to end it. I had to calculate 1 hour. It's going to be just 1 hour, okay? The rule of interpretation of statutes plays a crucial role in ensuring effective and consistent application of the law. So this is the purpose, okay? So that there is consistency, there is effectiveness, and there is no confusion. The literal rule emphasizes the plain meaning of the words, while the mischief rule aims to discern the lawmaker's intent by addressing the gaps in the previous laws. The golden rule provides flexibility by allowing departure from the literal meaning to avoid absurd outcomes. Finally, the rule of harmonious construction harmonizes conflicting provisions to give effect to the overall purpose of the statute. By employing these rules, courts strive to uphold the principles of fairness, justice, and the proper functioning of the legal system. This is the ultimate object. So we harmonize it so that there is a clear guideline, meaning given to a law, so there is no confusion. Okay. So I think this ends the talk. Now we can have a little bit of discussion. But please don't make it one way. You also must say something. They're all experienced people. I mean, the come amongst you for all. Mr. Jagat is there. You're there. I can see. Jyoti is there. She has a very long stint of practice, She has appeared before me so many times earlier. Rankita is my trainee. Subarna is Jwala also. So for you people over there behind this back, behind this front row, you all should have some. Do you have any curiosity to have any problems? I'm being very. If you need whatever I know, I'll try to tell you. Okay, but of course, as you cross the bridges, you will get to know. Okay. But that time, I was very unfortunate because I was not trained as a judge. Okay, I was trained as a lawyer. Of course, then I had a long stint of the advocate general. That was the only thing. So otherwise, I didn't have the opportunity to ask questions. Most of the time, I had to answer myself. Anything else? Okay, sorry. So we shall call it a day. I find that you are all quite rather tired and hungry. Okay. Thank you very much. Hope I didn't bore you all.